again. In Three Worlds, or Plan of Redemption, Nelson Barbour, Charles Taze Russell, page 150, he gets to the 7 last plagues, bases it on this text, Revelation 15 verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. There is a day of wrath in which men are to call for mountains and rocks to hide them from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? That's 6:16 of Revelation. And that these plagues, in which is fulfilled, or is filled up the wrath of God, belong to that day, is self-evident. The wrath of the Lamb and the gospel of grace cannot be mixed. Hence, until the day of salvation under the gospel shall end, the day of wrath cannot begin. And that wrath is complete in the 7 plagues, for in them, not in one of them, but in the 7, is filled up the wrath of God. Hence, like the seals, they all belong under the latter half of the 7th trumpet, the time of trouble, and are therefore future. For it is under the 7th trumpet the nations are angry, and thy wrath is come. So based on that information in the last 2 sentences, you'd have to say, this is written in 1877, that day of wrath, the 7 plagues, is upon us already and is going to end in 1914. So obviously the 7 last plagues, from Barbour and Russell's point of view, have to be immediately upon us, because we're now only 37 years away from 1914. He goes on, by reading the 15th chapter, you may notice that before the plagues are fulfilled, a select company are represented as on a sea of glass mingled with fire. And they sing the song of Moses and the Lamb, and say, who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou only art holy. For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. Here is a company gathered out who foretell what the nations are going to do. We also learn that before the plagues are fulfilled, the temple is filled with the glory of God, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 last plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. That's in verse 8 of chapter 15. The temple is the church. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God? 1 Corinthians 3:16. Then the church is to be filled with the glory of God, or glorified, before these plagues are fulfilled. And not until these plagues, in which is filled up the wrath of God, are fulfilled, and the day of wrath ended, can any more enter that temple. For I say unto you, many shall seek to enter in, and shall not be able, when once the master of the house has risen up and shut to the door. But it may be asked, how do you know the door will be opened again? I answer, the very language implies it. No man was able to enter until the plagues were fulfilled. Certainly implies that when the day of wrath is past, the door will again be opened, so that men can enter. I know this teaches probation after the resurrection, for the resurrection occurs in this time of wrath under the 7th trumpet. And not only do many that sleep in the dust of the earth awake during this time of trouble, but the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged. And under the 7th and last plague, that door is open again, and thank God, a false theology cannot close it. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven, from the throne, saying, it is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, and there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven. This is verses 18 to 21. Now read the closing of the 7th trumpet, under which the wrath of God comes. That's chapter 11, 18, and 19. The nations were angry. Thy wrath is come, the time of the dead, that they should be judged, that thou shouldst reward thy servants the prophets and the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there were lightnings and voices and thunders, and an earthquake and great hail. The voices and lightnings and thunders and earthquake and hail at the ending of the 7th trumpet, and also during the 7th and last plague, are clearly the same. And the fact that the temple was shut prior to the 1st plague, and not again to be opened until the 7 plagues were fulfilled, And the statement at the ending of the seventh trumpet and day of wrath, that it was opened, synchronized in time and place too closely not to have reference to the same events. Hence there is a day of wrath unmixed with mercy, a time when men will call and God will not answer. And all the world are to pass through this hour of temptation, while a class are to escape. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. This is said to the Philadelphia church, but of course is true to those who escape all these things which are coming on the earth and stand before the Son of Man. In heaven may cause some to stumble, hence I remark, he's talking about the end of chapter 11, that some of this, that is the Ark of the Covenant, are seen in heaven. And so he says, in heaven may cause some to stumble, hence I remark, everything on the spiritual plane is said to be in heaven. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought, and the dragon fought and his angels. This is a spiritual warfare, not necessarily a warfare of spirits. We war not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual powers in heavenly places. And the temple of God in heaven means his spiritual temple, and the kingdom of heaven means his spiritual kingdom, which under his saints is soon to be established over all. For to the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come. Some of our fellow servants have attempted to locate these plagues, or the most of them, in the past. But here is a fatal difficulty to such an application. For nothing can be more certain than that no man can enter the temple of God during the pouring out of the 7 last plagues. Hence they cannot begin until the door is shut. The nature and somewhat of the magnitude of these plagues may be gathered from what is known of the trumpets, they being mainly in the past. Let the reader begin with the first trumpet, chapter 8, verse 7, and the first plague, chapter 16, verse 2, and compare them from the first to the 7th, and knowing something of the terrible scourges on the world under those trumpets, you may multiply the scourge of the corresponding plague by 3. For where a third part of men were slain, tormented, etc., under a trumpet, the plague is upon all. It will be seen from chapter 16, verse 15, that under the 6th plague, just before the temple is again to be opened, the class who have to pass through this time of trouble, and who are to be ready when their Lord shall return from the wedding, are encouraged to keep their garments, lest they walk naked. But I can imagine some asking, does he come more than once? Yes, I answer, 12 times. At the first advent, the prophecy, behold, thy king cometh, meek and lowly, riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the foal of an ass, was fulfilled, after he had come in many different ways. And now, at his second advent, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. And he comes again when he returns from the wedding, and he comes for his saints, and he comes with his saints. But let us, my brethren, watch and pray always, that we may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. I'll put a link into Michael's standing. This is what's being alluded to here. Michael's standing, Daniel chapter 12, the beginning. And it's linked to a passage that we weren't familiar with as witnesses, Jeremiah 30, where you hear for the first time of the day of Jacob's trouble, the great tribulation.